Yo, what's good? Back with another one. Now, we're going to start off with this person. His name is William Cooper. Now, William Cooper was a guy that knew a lot of good information, and he even had a beef with Alex Jones back in the days. Like, William Cooper is what Alex Jones tries to pretend to be. We already know people like Alex Jones is like they're like controlled opposition, but William Cooper was the real deal, and he was targeted and he was neutralized by the government. Now, what's important about him is he wrote a book called Behold a Pale Horse, and you have to find the original version because the new version they kind of took out some details when he's talking about the Illuminati or whatever. Like a lot of booksellers, a lot of retailers, they didn't want to sell the book because this guy had a lot of good information. But anyway, find his book called Behold a Pale Horse. You can find the PDF format, but more than likely, he's probably going to take out all the main things he was talking about. But he's definitely one of my teachers and somebody that is amazing when it comes to the secret knowledge. Next, we're going to talk about this is a document, a CIA document from World War II, talking about an underground base, and it was talking about an underground base in Germany. As you can see that person's name right there. You see that name right there. It says that person, large underground headquarters at. There it is. It's talking about how the Fuhrer had like a bunker or whatever. But basically, I brought this up just to say that, underground bunkers is not something that's new. Like people have been having underground bases and underground bunkers and stuff of that nature for a long time. This is a CIA document talking about certain bunkers in Germany and around places. So remember the last video I was showing you deep underground bases. So imagine them building in deep underground bases in places like Antarctica, stuff like that. The next little article I want to talk about is in World War II, Stalin had a place called Cannibal Island. And Cannibal Island, this was a place where it's kind of like a gulag. If you guys know anything about the Soviet Union and Russia, how if you get in trouble in the Soviet Union, they'll throw you in the gulag. Well, this was like an island gulag. This was a gulag in which they would throw people on an island, and it was just like the Hunger Games. People were feasting on, all types of things, children, the elderly, the weak, so it was brutal. And this shows you a map, there's Russia right here, and then there's the island right here where they would throw people, and they'll leave them there with no food, and people had to, pretty much fight for food, right? And it says, without tools or shelter or food and surrounded by armed guards who eliminated anyone who tried to brave the icy river, the prisoners quickly fell victim to starvation, disease, violence, and brutal elements. And still, additional barges continued to pull up at the island. So it was just ridiculous. So Cannibal Island was like, it was like a free for all. And this is something that doesn't really get talked about. But it goes to show you that these people can make camps and they can throw us all onto one place. And people will fight each other. If people fight each other on an island like this, imagine what people are going to do when like something happens when the power supply goes off, right? So this is Stalin's Cannibal Island. Now, something else I want to talk about that I find interesting, and I was going to go more detail, but I was like, let me kind of ease people into the secret knowledge. Let me not just go full blown, you know what I mean? Because it'll kind of scale it. Let me kind of ease people into this so they can see that I'm not crazy. Now, it says President Barack Obama shares blood with a wide network of notable figures, including U.S. presidents, historical figures, and European royalty. President Obama. Now, look who President Obama is related to: George Bush, Harry S. Truman, and you got to understand that all these presidents, they're all blood related. There's a reason why people of power and position and prestige always get into these positions, like becoming president or whatever, and you find out they're all related. I heard Beyonce Beyonce is related to the Queen of England, and it's like, is it a coincidence that Beyonce, and all these people that are famous and rich, they all got blood ties. Who would have known that President Obama has blood ties to European royalty? Like, who would have known stuff like that? So that goes to show you that these Illuminati members, they use the reptilian bloodline, and they put their own kin in these positions of power, wealth, and influence. It's crazy. Next, I'm going to talk about Unit 731. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Now, Unit 731 was an experimental biological facility. Now, there was other places like Unit 731, but this is like a place where they specifically did all types of biological human torture, and it was created by the Japanese. And the Japanese would go to their conquered territories, and they would get people by force and put them to these facilities. Now let's find out some of the things they were doing at Unit 731, in case you never heard of it. Yes. And also, people at Unit 731, after the war, the Japanese officers and the people that commanded it, they were not prosecuted. Instead, the United States said, give us all your data on the human experimentation and we'll let you go. And that's exactly what happened. Kind of like Operation Paperclip, and how Werner von Braun became the head of NASA, and he was previously from the Nazi Party, but then he joined NASA. So Unit 731 is infamous for human experimentation during its existence during World War II. At least 3,000 men, women, and children were subjected as Muratas, or as logs, to experimentations conducted by the Unit 731 division at Pingfang alone. Here's an article on why they were called Muratas. Dr. Harris Sheldon estimates at least 10,000 to 12,000 prisoners died in biological experiments. Frostbite testing. So we're going to go through all their testing real quick. Might as well. So this is the first testing. And I know there was a lot more because I read a book on this, and it goes into more detail, but this is just like an overview, so pay attention. So in Unit 731, they were doing frostbite testing. It says Yoshimuro Hisato, a psychologist in Unit 731, had a special interest in hypothermia and used human subjects to test reactions to frostbites. Hisato routinely submerged prisoners' limbs in a tub of water filled with ice and held them there until the limbs were frozen solid and a coat of ice were formed over the skin. He timed the victims to check how long it took for the human bodies to develop frostbite. According to one of the witnesses to the frostbite testing, the limbs made a sound like a plank of wood when struck with a cane. Then he tried different methods for rapidly thawing off the frozen appendages, such as dousing limbs with hot water, open fire, or leaving the subject untreated overnight to see how long it took for the prisoner's blood to thaw it out. Unit 731 was able to prove scientifically that the best treatment for frostbite was to immerse it in water with a bit warmer than 100 degrees, but never more than 122 degrees. So they were literally just freezing people like popsicles and putting them inside even colder stuff, and then taking it out and seeing how, the temperature fluctuations. Remember, this wasn't just done on adults. They were doing this on children as well, and that's what makes it so gruesome. Now let's see what else they were doing. So look at that. A visection. A visection is the practice of performing operations on living beings for the purpose of experimentation or scientific research. Now, they're doing operations on people that are conscious. This reminds me of Marion Sims and what he was doing to enslave women in America. But if they're doing this on the surface, this is what humans are doing to each other at Unit 731. Imagine what they're doing in Area 51 and classified bases. Imagine what they're doing underground where you can't see. So the vivisection was performed in Unit 731 without anesthesia to study the operations of the living systems. It was performed on thousands of victims, mostly Chinese communist prisoners as well as children and elderly farmers. They were affected with diseases such as cholera and the plague, and then they had their organs removed for examination before they died in order to study the effects of the disease without decomposition after death. Subjects that were used to study the progress of gangrene had their limbs amputated and reattached to the other side of the body, while others had their limbs crushed or frozen or had their circulation cut off after the body was used up and exhausted. They were normally shot or killed by lethal injection. Just wow. And this is just stuff that is just out there, right? Now let's see some of their weapon testing. It says Unit 731 studied bayonets, swords, knives with the use of their prisoners. They also studied flamethrowers on both covered and exposed skin. They also set up gas chambers to test subjects with blister agents and nerve gas. They also studied prolonged X-ray exposure, which sterilized and killed thousands of testing subjects. So these people were going wild here at Unit 731. They were doing all types of testing, and you wonder why I always talk about underground bases and secret places and secret things, because things like this go on. They do evil stuff, man. It's absolutely horrible. It's absolutely horrendous. Let's continue. Venereal disease. The Imperial Japanese Army was interested in the symptoms and treatment of syphilis. Male prisoners infected with syphilis were ordered to Here you go. Male prisoners infected with syphilis were ordered to, you see that word, ordered to do that to female and male prisoners to monitor the onset of the disease. More that were arranged until the exposure established infection. Testing the human limits. So they had people who had diseases, who had infectious sexual transmitted diseases, force themselves upon others in order to spread the disease so they can study the effects. Wow. Wow. Testing the human limits. There were human subjects locked up and deprived of food and water to learn how long humans could survive. In order to study crash injuries, heavy subjects were dropped onto bounded prisoners. The effects of high G-force on pilots and falling paratroopers were studied by loading human beings into large centrifuges and spun them at higher and higher speeds until they lost consciousness or passed away, which usually happened between 10 and 15 G's. So those things they use in NASA that spin you around, like, okay, if you don't know anything about fighter pilots, there's a thing called G's and G-force. And the higher the G-forces you have in airplanes, the more you can actually pass out when you're twisting and turning. So those centrifuges, in Unit 731, they would take people and put them in those centrifuges. Those things that spin around until you just get dizzy? And they would just spin around and spin around and spin around until people actually passed away. What a horrible way to pass. What a horrible way to pass away. So now we're going to talk about this right here. You see what's on the screen. Female prisoners of childbearing age were forcibly impregnated so that weapon and trauma experiments could be done on them. Pregnant test subjects were infected with various diseases exposed to chemical weapons, crash injuries, bullet wounds, and shrapnel injuries. Then they were opened up and the effects on the fetuses were studied. Pregnant women with syphilis was a special interest to the researchers of Unit 731. Look how horrible that is. All that's self-explanatory, and this is pretty much the book where all this knowledge came from, Unit 731 right there. It says Unit 731, the Forgotten Asian Auschwitz. The Japanese invasion of China during the Second Sino-Japanese War has left a strong legacy of hate and disgust among many Chinese today. Much of the atrocities committed by the Japanese are now known to most historians. By far the most despicable and forgotten act against humanity committed by the Imperial Japanese government was its covert biochemical weapons program, euphemistically labeled as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Imperial Japanese Army. The Japanese conducted a wide range of cruel and inhumane experiments on prisoners who were often innocent. Now, we just took a taste. Now, it got worse. In the different books I read, they were doing things it got bad. That's all I gotta say. Just imagine doing whatever you wanted to people. And it's funny how the name that they came up with was, instead of being called Unit 731 and doing their biological evil, it was called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Wow. It's really crazy, man, how this world works, yeah.